Okay, welcome everybody to Dojo Talks. Today, the senseis are going to be discussing a book that we've all recently read, Dark Squares, Daniel Rensch's. That feels weird to call him Daniel. Danny Rensch's. It probably says, no, it even says Danny on the cover. Okay, great. So we can just go with Danny. I thought it might be all formal. Okay, Danny Rensch's memoir. Uh, which is about two-thirds devoted to his childhood and upbringing, and maybe a third devoted to his times as a chief chess officer at chess.com. Now, obviously, anyone listening to this podcast knows that's, a big company that's kind of having a large-sized influence on the chess world. And for me, it was a very interesting read. I was probably privy to, something like 70 or 80% of what was in the book. And so, there's an element where it's interesting to read things you don't know about, an element where it's interesting to read things you don't know about. I was, a little bit shocked and emotionally impacted by a lot of the stuff about the childhood, the bits the parts that I didn't know. Um, And yeah, we can talk about any topic that this book inspired with either of you. Um, and let's see, Jesse, you do a lot of book reviews, so I'm going to toss it to you first to give us your first impressions on the book.
Well, first of all, I did do a book review already. It came out a while ago, and I really want to do this talk because there's so many great chess books out there, but it's rare that all three of us read a book. And so I thought it would be cool to have a chance to discuss it. And I think originally we wanted to have Danny on, and that would have been great, but I think even might even be better without Danny, just so that we can kind of throw the ball around a little bit with our reactions, because there's a lot in this book uh, that was tangential to my life. And I'm sure you guys have a similar thing where events happen. You're like, oh, I was at that tournament, or, I kind of had a sense of what was going on. So there's a lot of things that it brought up for me that I thought would be interesting to just kind of get into. Thought it was a great read. Um, and one of the things that I guess I'll begin with is basically the chess world, maybe excepting a few people. We'll ask David how much he knew, but the chess world basically didn't know what was going on in Danny's life. Like, I knew about his ear problem, for
Yeah.
example, but I had
Yep.
no idea that that was caused by gross negligence of a community that he belonged to, for example.
Mhm.
I knew that that ear problem, in my head, the ear problem, which I didn't fully understand or anything at the time. I don't know if I fully understand it now. I'm not a doctor, but I mean, I knew that that impacted his game. And in my take of it at the time, like when I first played him 2004, I thought he was going to be a GM very soon. And then the ear problem kind of was going on, escalated, I think, after that. And then played him again, I think 2007. And by that time, like, he had made no progress and he had regressed a certain amount. So, like, I was aware of that kind of thing in his chess, right? But I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of the whole background story.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain amount that we know about the life stories of other chess players that we meet, right? There are people you've
Right.
bounced around at tournaments, played
Mhm.
them three or four times without becoming close friends, let's say. You're still going to know like a few things, right? Like, oh, this guy's from Arizona or this guy's from
Right.
Minnesota, and they've got one other good player in their town. They probably, train together or whatever. Like
Right.
you have like a few little things which like paint your picture, right? So we
Mhm.
so we would have known like, oh, Danny, this like ear thing has really like it's impacting him. We're always thinking about the trajectory of all these people and what it's going to take to beat them or draw them at a future tournament and what's going on with them in that way. So
Right.
yeah, that's a part of it. It's interesting to wonder also when you read this, like what is all that more detail to the people where you only have the superficial
Mhm.
elements, right? Like you're like, oh, this dude was, going on this trajectory and then maybe this happened and they're here, but there's probably all this extra detail um behind it. Um
And let me ask you, David. So you became close to Danny, I want to say 2008, when the whole chess.com thing started. How much
Mhm.
did you know about where he was living in that whole situation?
Yeah, I mean, interesting. I can't trace exactly how I became so close to Danny because I I became more close to him obviously when we worked together at chess.com, but I invited him to come work with me at chess.com and had a lot of long conversations with him about moving to chess.com. Um, and so to be having those conversations, I already really wanted him to work at chess.com. So we already had some degree of, you know, friendship relation, estimation of each other because, in the book how he talks about how he was building his own thing, right? His own internet
Mhm.
chess company, and he talks about trying to buy up some URLs and trying to
Mhm.
start a
Right.
chess business. Uh, it was called American Chess.
Mhm.
Um, and for him, it was a very difficult decision to stop working on American Chess and switch to working at chess.com. And I remember we had conversations about it. It's like, we were, you know, what he was doing with American Chess was not hidden to me, right? Like I knew that he was working on it. We were talking about the balance and the choice between
Mhm.
keeping going on his own, so to speak, with it, right? Um, or kind of letting it go and joining and going all in on chess.com where he was already a contributor. Um, so yeah, I mean, we must have already been growing a little bit closer just from contacts at chess tournaments, even before he started working at chess.com. And I think just recognizing like, oh, this person is doing some similar things to you, right? Like trying to do some chess organization in their community, running tournaments. He was trying to build up his local chess scene as well as built. Like in the book, he talks about building this, trying to build. Basically, he wanted to build something kind of like chess.com, right? Like a big
Mhm.
chess company.
Right.
But I think it may not really be mentioned in the book, but he was also building the local at the same time. Like he was going around, not just teaching tournaments, but organizing events and trying to create a community and everything needed for that local chess community in Arizona, right? Just like when we're doing our dojo project, we're trying to run tournaments, as we were just discussing, right?
Mhm.
For the people in our community to have quality tournaments to practice in and then go back do their study and all this. So he was building locally, and I think that's one thing that he and I recognized with each other, right? Was like I had invested a lot in trying to contribute to the Bay Area chess
Right.
community, and he was doing a similar thing in Arizona, and that may have been one of the first things that caused us to kind of you know get sort of close with each other. Kostya, you were also helping out with Metropolitan Chess,
Mhm.
and sort of helping to create a better tournament scene in Los Angeles. That was kind of like a mandate there.
Sure.
And honestly, I think that's another thing that made me kind of connect with you and deepen our relationship was sort of like you do postmortems with hundreds of players maybe, right? And of those hundreds of players, maybe 2 dozen or so you get some kind of extra affinity for,
Hmm.
right? And you feel like they're moving through the world in some interesting ways that might be similar or different, but something that catches you. Um, I don't know. What do you think, Hosty, about how we sort of like pick our friends at tournaments and make those connections?
No, I remember I was just thinking about this just now as you guys were talking about how I I think David, you were the one that originally like asked me to do commentary on one of those Metropolitan Chess events for
Yeah,
chess.com, and
yeah,
that might have been my first time doing commentary ever
yeah,
for a tournament. Um so that was cool. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay, that happened.
yeah,
I don't know if I've told this story on the podcast before or even to you guys, but I remember our first postmortem when we played, David, you and I,
yeah,
which was the first time we met because I don't think we knew each other. So we just met over the board
yeah,
basically. And then we played this game. It was a French. I was
Yeah.
black. I think we drew.
Yeah.
And then we are doing a postmortem. And then I remember Jesse came over and joined us for a bit.
Oh, wow. I have no recollections. So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
year was
So
that?
so Kostya was probably like 2240 or 50 at the time.
Mhm.
Okay.
Um, and I was probably already 2400 because I'm a bit
Oh,
older,
I am
right?
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the time, he was just very, very stubborn about not giving up. You know, he had like a wretched French position for hours and hours. And I was like, I've won this position like dozens of times. Like, why is he not? Why is he not cracking? You know, like, oh, and he's
Yeah.
like, you know, he just keeps digging in and digging in. Um, yeah. So,
I think that was
Kostya, that was my impression was that you
2008.
defended very stubbornly.
Yeah. No, I definitely was worse in that game. I don't remember being totally lost, but
That's probably part of how you defended it was you didn't know you were totally lost.
yeah, that was like 2008, I think, 2009,
Hang it.
and I'm pretty sure it was in the Bay Area. I
Mhm.
forget the name of the tournament, but
Mhm.
I remember playing a lot of like Bay Area people. The funny
Yeah.
thing was when Jesse came over, we were in the middle of analyzing the middle game, and I think like Jesse, you made some suggestion for black, and you were like I don't know, you said something like you're like, okay, let's play like F6 or some typical French bullshit. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why it stuck with me because you're a grandmaster, and I was like, huh.
Huh.
So,
So we just play moves based on it looks like some typical bullshit. Like we
yeah.
don't have to calculate anything or have a big idea.
Yeah, yeah. Here I was like working hard on this position, and then yeah, Jesse's like, I don't know, just make some move. Like,
You know.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, and then I remember visiting chess.com in the early days in Mountain View, shortly after one of the Berkeley Internationals,
Mhm.
that Danny mentions in the book. And yeah, I remember you guys working together on the first Speed Chess Championship, the death matches.
Mhm.
I remember watching you guys play the first one in the office. Um, and yeah, so yeah, for me, okay, so going into the book, I really enjoyed the book, and I definitely came for like the Han stuff. That was kind
Okay.
of, somewhat promised, but then I stayed for the cult stuff because the cult stuff was just so much more interesting.
Yeah.
Hard to read, to be honest, but really fascinating.
Mm.
And yeah, it definitely made me rethink of all the times I met Danny. Because when I met Danny originally, I feel like he wasn't that much older than me. I think uh, yeah, he's like 7, 8 years older than me. So when
Mhm.
I was 16, 17, he would have been like 23, 24, 25 or so at that time.
Mhm.
But he's already like having a kid, he's already married, and he's gone through all this stuff. So it's just like, yeah, it makes me rethink everything. Because
Mhm.
I knew very little about what's in the book.
Mhm.
Even stuff that's like public knowledge. Like I didn't really know the background of like the Shelby School and their run. I actually had no idea that they
Mhm.
had this like, huge national school run and
Yeah.
all this stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like Pieta Garrett, the number two from
Right.
that team who he mentioned, right? He was somebody like very strong. I've played
Very
against him
strong.
in tournaments. Jesse, have you played him?
Oh yeah, well, I would say one of the things I wanted more of the book is I wanted more of the story of those kids because
Yeah.
I remember playing Pieta in Reno. Very interesting guy. I remember he had like long red hair and he was very strong. I was like, where did this kid come from?
Yeah.
And then I remember asking Danny about him years later, and he was kind of like, oh, it gave me a dismissive answer. And maybe I felt like that came through in the book too. I was like, wait a second, Danny, these kids that you played with are central to this story because it was a whole community of chess players that you belong to. And the way the story is told in Dark Squares is a little bit like this is a story of me, Danny. But I needed to know a little bit more about those peripheral characters to set the scene of what was going on, like when he's studying with Igor and stuff and all these other players. And it because it wasn't just Danny. Pieta was like he could have been a GM for sure. I don't even know what happened. And I know that the story of the Colt and how that interacted with that chess team, a lot of the threads of that I feel would come out more clearly if we knew Pieta's story and these other kids, because I don't even know what the other kids were doing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, see, that's a name I had no idea of before before the book. And yeah, another name, okay, name I heard, Igor Ivanov, but I never saw the guy or met the guy. So for me, he was always like a bit of a mythical
Oh
creature.
yeah, for me,
That was
so
great to read about him for
well, so
sure.
one of the amazing things about the book for me was that there's three people mentioned that are critical to his story that were critical to my story. And so he is in Arizona. Now you might think they're neighboring states, but it's actually a very far drive, especially he's in southern Arizona. I'm in northern New Mexico, right? And so Igor Ivanov was the one player who you might play who was a very strong GM. It wasn't even a GM at the time; he was an IM, but I thought of him as a GM, and he would come play these local tournaments. And so I played Igor first, maybe 1989, and so Igor, and I didn't know this, went and then lives at this cult. Unbelievable that Igor would go live in the cult just for some extra vodka and a little trailer, dude.
Yeah.
What an amazing story. I was like, oh my God, I didn't know this part about Igor. I didn't know he
Yeah.
actually lived in this little village. Okay, so there's Igor. And then there were two master level players who lived in Santa Fe when I was in high school. And that was Steve Stubenrauch, who's now passed away. Steve Stubenrauch like came up with the fermion and had a lot of chess. He was very enthusiastic, really into it. He had come to Santa Fe for like some acupuncture school. And already that was like, let's call it's Santa Fe acupuncture school. You're already cult adjacent right there. So I have a lot of stuff in my own life which is cult adjacent. And then also Spencer Lauer, who was very like a liberal, interesting dude who then moves to Arizona and becomes flamingly right wing over there. But then, so basically, those two guys moved over there. And like me, they were like the local players that you would play against. In fact, like there's no internet when I'm growing up. So I play against those guys again and again and again. And then, almost by a miracle of chance, they move to Phoenix. And that's who Danny plays again and again and again coming up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you make a good point about like the characters because the character of Ivanov was very well developed in the book. Like you get such a clear picture of him. You can
Yeah.
see him, you can hear him depending on how your internal mind works, whether you picture things or hear things or whatever. But you can see and hear him like singing drunkenly, asking Danny for another drink. Um, and that really brings that part of that book to life
So, yeah.
beautifully. And I feel like, yeah, maybe a little bit more on some of the other Shelby kids could have done something similar. I'm sure
There we go.
Danny had to make a lot of tough choices about what he did or didn't include. And there might be parts. No, I know there are parts that he originally wrote that aren't in the book, right? Um, but I agree, like if there was something that would be like really cool to hear a bit more of, I think it would be some of those other kids on the Shelby team. How did this stuff play out for them? Maybe some of that, he feels like it's their story and not his. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, I agree. I agree. It would have added some more life to it to hear a little bit about, what were they into and where did they go?
Right.
Uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
I was honestly surprised by how much Danny did kind of reveal in the book. I thought he was like very, very open and honest about a lot of stuff that I couldn't see myself doing if I was in his situation. I think
Well,
that was my main takeaway, actually. It was just like Danny, he's giving a bunch of interviews about the book. And from what I've seen, he was always kind of like downplaying the cult stuff. He was saying like, oh, it wasn't like the cultiest cult, it wasn't like this crazy suicide cult or anything like that. But if you read the book, like it was a cult. Like it was a dark, like a really dark upbringing, like really bad. Like I think he really didn't let on just how awful it was in his situation.
well,
Mhm.
and one of the things I want to just say on that is like those of us who knew him for years and years, he wasn't open at all about the cult. And I think understandably,
Yeah.
like he wasn't telling anyone. That's one of the things I wanted to ask David, if how much of it he knew. Like no one, as far as I knew about it. Now they knew about the team because the team had crushed all kinds of players. And there was like my friend Kevin Bachler in Chicago was doing scholastic chess. This is before way, and he told me this story well before the book came out. And he was like, yeah, these kids down there, they had like he knew that they had like different, like the different like moms and dads, and in his picture of it, like the kids were forced by the cult to move from one parent to the next, which is kind of true, but it wasn't like institutionalized the way Kevin Bachler told the story. He didn't know, of course, but he was just like, yeah, these kids had, who knew who their parents were. And, when you're a homeschool team, there are a lot of American homeschool teams out there. It's very hard because people are going to question, like, are you really part of the same school? And are you cheating by doing this? And in fact, the homeschool teams, in my experience, aren't really ever cheating because they're just a much smaller group of kids, but they have some kind of teacher who is inspiring them, like he or this guy's uncle, or Danny's uncle. Anyways, but the rest of the chess community is going to look askance at that because they don't understand it, and so then that's how they're going to get probed by other people.
Honestly, Jesse, for someone on the outside, that was pretty accurate information. I mean, that kids could get taken from one parent, given to another. They might not know who their parents were. I mean, that was like incredible that Danny was like living next door to his dad for, 10 years without knowing his dad was his dad.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. That's like bonkers.
Yeah.
Right? His dad only reveals that he's his dad in order to prevent his sister from developing a crush on him. Right? That's the impetus to reveal, like, oh yeah, I am your neighbor, but I am also your dad.
Yeah. I mean, that whole cult was just such a messed up place, like just with all like their processes, right? Where they get together, they drink, and they just like call each other out for not following like cult practices. Oh my God. Jeez. Like, Jesus.
But I guess what I was driving at was to say, so for years and years, Danny had built a wall around himself, not letting anyone really know what was going on in his scene. And then with this book, it's like, well, if I'm going to let the wall down, I'm going to completely flip it and just tear it all the way down.
Yeah.
And that was for us, for new Danny. I think that's one of the reasons the book is so interesting. It's like, oh my God, you really had an incredible wall built up around you that nobody knew about any of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, so when he was, Jesse, you asked what I knew. I mean, when he was younger and I played him once or twice in some tournaments.
Yeah.
Early days when he was, I don't know, maybe 16 to 18, coming up, I didn't know anything. He was just like an opponent at a tournament at first, right?
Right.
It was only later that we became friends that I learned stuff, but I still didn't learn like the extent of all this stuff. Like in everything, there's something I recognize, and then, I didn't know it went that far, right? Like I knew that he had like switched between living with his mom or his dad, right? Like I didn't know that cult politics had played into it and that people were fighting over him or something like that, right? You see what I mean? So like for everything that happened, like there was something that I knew when we were friends, and then like layers to it, which I had not gotten into, right?
Right.
And I've been to a trance, but I haven't been to a process, right? So I've been to the part where, Trina speaks with this other
time out.
voice.
Time out. You've been to Trina's thing, dude?
Yeah.
Oh shit. Time out, bro. Time out. Everything, hold up everything. Slow it back down. Tell us about this experience, dude.
Well, I mean, Danny talks about the experience in the book. It's as he says, like lights would go down, right?
Wait, but how did you get invited to this thing? How did it all like?
Danny just invited me.
How did he describe it?
I mean, I was I'd come to hang out with him in Arizona. Like we'd meet up, and so I came and stayed with him a couple times. So like. We wandered the backwoods with his kids, right? Like he had wandered them when he was a kid. It's beautiful. I didn't knowingly walk barefoot through any of the open sewage, as far as I know. But it's like a beautiful area, and he invited me to come to the trance like it was no big deal, like. Just come check out what they're doing. He'd explain to me what the spiritual ideas were of the cult, like that. Like I knew what the spiritual ideas of the cult were.
But he
We
didn't
talked
call it a
about, is
cult
it a
back
cult or
then,
not a cult?
did he?
What's that?
Was he already calling it a cult?
But so yeah, so good question, Costa. Like it was kind of like, this may or may not be a cult, kind of, right? It was like, we understand that it sort of looks like maybe a cult, or, that it's like an alternative spiritual community, right? But he wasn't like, at that point, if you match it chronologically in the book, then at that point he obviously already had some doubts about it, but he was also still in it in a way, right? And I think that's something that he paints pretty well in the book, how he could be sort of like one foot in the door, one foot out the door in a way. Like you're part of it, but you also already have some doubts. When you finally leave, then you think like, oh my gosh, like I had doubts going back 7 years, right? But if you didn't leave, I mean, you could stay in it for 30 years and those doubts would just sort of
Yeah.
be a thing on the side, right? So, he presented it to me and not at all a negative light or anything like that. And also, like, he was like open about it, which is a little bit uncult like, right? Because normally you'd think a cult would like keep its stuff secret or whatever, right? So it wasn't really like a big deal. It wasn't very different than if like a Christian person invited you to go to church with them someday, right? Like they're not hiding what's happening in church, and you may or may not believe in it, but you're like just accompanying somebody to check out a part of their life, right? Without there being a huge stake, like whoever's right or wrong about the spiritual nature of the universe is, damned or condemned or shouldn't be in touch with each other or whatever, right?
It was basically just like an alternative church situation.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, Dave, let me ask a couple follow-ups. So what year are we talking about?
I don't know, maybe 2009, 2010.
Okay, so pretty early on. And so at that stage, he had already had a kid at that point, right?
Oh yeah, he
Yeah.
had already two kids.
Amazing.
I remember carrying them around in the forest. They were so cute.
Amazing, dude. Okay, so what I want to know though, from your perspective is, all right, so let me just, for people who haven't read the book, we're talking about this lady who comes out of the 60s and she channels, I guess we're going to call him a 16th century English gentleman. And this gentleman says things. And when you just read that, it sounds completely implausible. And we know it has to have some, I mean, as a reader, I'm like, well, this woman had to have some kind of level of extraordinary charisma and plausibility in person, because from a distance, it's like, oh my God, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. So I want to ask you, David, did it feel plausible to you? Did it feel like this is something you could imagine yourself being drawn into, or what was it like?
I mean, it felt about as plausible as any other religion to me, as in not plausible. Um, I mean, I've spent my life around people who are in various religions, none of which strike me as plausible, right? So I've had to navigate for my whole life what to say or not say, like how much
So you didn't feel a charisma work.
how much to humor people who
Yeah.
like strongly believe something which has like, I can't prove it's not true, nor do I want to, but I just, it doesn't seem very likely to me. But I mean, like, in terms of the invitation, obviously, Trina and Steven, I would guess, and I guessed that Danny had cleared it with them before inviting me. So they were very open about letting a random guy in. Nobody like vetted me or asked me if I was going to say anything about it or not. Nothing. There was nothing weird about it. You know what I mean? There was nothing there was nothing to feel weird about it. The same as walking into a church on a main thoroughfare on a Sunday, right? In person, it's Steven who's very charismatic. And Trina is more calm or quiet, or might even be an introvert for all I know, right? I mean, Steven has like a ton of charisma, and he like, I remember he would sort of be like hanging out on his porch all the time and like speaking kindly to every person who walks by, and really very interested in people. I mean, everything in Danny's portrait of him rings true. I mean, I don't really have like tons of things to add that aren't in there because Danny's account is extremely accurate. I guess that's one thing I could say. I could say Danny's account is extremely accurate
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
based on what I've seen, right? The fact that I would have very little to add to it. You know, he characterizes these people, basically all of whom I've met. He characterizes them all very accurately, or very much as I would characterize them.
Mhm.
You know, everybody was open and friendly. So yeah, so I went in there and I was invited and just accepted in. I didn't have to say anything about what I thought or didn't think, and obviously I didn't think it was very likely that a spirit from 400 years before or 300 years before was going to appear and speak to us. And
Mhm. Mhm.
I was just like, well, somebody's going to use an accent in the dark.
Yeah.
You know.
So, okay, here, let me ask this then. Because one of the things that came to my mind as I was reading it is, in some ways, the selling point of the story is, oh my God, this terrible thing happened to me. I was in a cult. But as someone reading it, I was like, wait a second. This, in a lot of ways, was an incredibly beautiful upbringing. So
Yeah,
you,
and
if you go to Google Maps and look at where he lives, it's very similar terrain to, like, let's say, the foothills of Santa Fe, where I grew up. Just an
yeah,
incredibly beautiful place you can run and play. And oh my God. And
yeah,
you're kind of away from society a little bit, so you don't have a lot of the same temptations. I'm sure me and you, David, have both dreamed of, well, I think you've been far more successful in keeping your kids away from all the social harms, but it's just there. And so if you imagine it just as a father, you're like, I'm out of here. I'm out of
yeah,
here, buddy. I don't want any part of this crap. I'm going to raise my kids in Tonto Village or whatever it's called, way out of,
yeah,
it's a beautiful vision.
yeah.
And especially if you imagine that cult not having the alcohol involved, right? Because
Okay.
that seems to be that was the cult's downfall. Then that cult
That's an
probably,
interesting
right?
interpretation.
Well, right, because like you have all kinds of people believe in all kinds of weird stuff, but the true dysfunctionality that he describes seems to always coincide when they're out drinking and then they do a process together, and that ain't
That's
the
really
thing.
interesting.
It's like,
I That's really interesting
when you have
perspective.
when Thanksgiving's coming up, you don't want to be at that family get together where people start drinking and airing family grievances. That's like historically, that's like when things go bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
especially
I want to get Kostya's perspective on something that you just said. So you said like sort of the hook of the book, right? Is
right.
like I was in this cult and it was so awful and horrible. And Kostya, I'm curious, like how how did you perceive the influence of the cult on Danny's life? Did you feel like this was like a pure horror story or like a complicated story? Like how did you feel the perspective was
Yeah. I actually see
on
it
that?
as a very sad story because I feel like a big part of the book was that Stephen Camp, this guy that runs the cult, is essentially the one that gets Danny into chess, right? And like really pushes Danny. So for anyone that didn't read the book, it's like Danny was basically a nobody in the cult, but then they discovered that he's good at chess. And Stephen Camp is apparently obsessed with chess, true chess fan, and starts pushing Danny to pursue chess. And then they start the Shelby School, and that was one of the funniest moments of the book when it's Danny writes about how no one understood how the Shelby School was winning because no one knew that they were in a cult. It's like, yeah, no kidding. You have all these like junior high kids like worshiping a guy doing chess 24/7. Yeah, they're gonna win some tournaments. Um, but ultimately, it's like a very sad story because it feels like Stephen and other people in the cult. I mean, they just did a lot of damage to Danny and other kids, like with all this stuff, like taking Danny away from his mom and separating
Good.
them and
Good.
having him move. I mean, it's just like very manipulative. The whole thing is just horrible. But ultimately, it's like chess becomes Danny's thing, and I mean, I think he's very grateful that he had chess now, like right, like now that's become basically the cornerstone of his success. Like if he wasn't a chess player, right, we basically wouldn't really know him, right?
Yeah.
So I feel that's definitely what I got from the book is that he's like he's very torn between his gratitude for being introduced to chess
Okay.
with his like
Yeah.
anger for what he had to go through.
Okay. So there's that like mix or nuance that I was wondering if either of you also felt because I felt like he gave a very nuanced take, and it wasn't just like the cult ruined my life. It was also like somehow the cult also led to a great life for him in some ways, right? Like,
Yeah, at the end of the book, I mean, Stephen Camp is one of the people he thanks for introducing him to chess or like pushing him. And
yeah,
it's like, and he just spent so much time writing about like what a horrible person this guy is.
And
yeah,
amazingly, he also acknowledges Dr. Duran, who is the dude that Trina channels.
right.
I was like, dang, Danny, you acknowledge that guy?
Yeah. So, yeah, because okay, like there's definitely parts that are horrible or sad, right? But I thought Danny provided a lot of nuance where like he's also giving people like Stephen Camp credit for good qualities. And he's also like showing good and bad things about his upbringing, right? So he's saying like, yes, like the adults made the kids like crawl through the sewage, but also the kids got to spend their time in like beautiful nature and play really freely, right? Or he'd say like, yes, Stephen Camp used me for some kind of purpose of his, but also he was a true chess fan and he really did love chess and he really did love, the games that I played and like, supporting chess players, period, right? Like he even says like, if Danny, the guy was happy to support Igor Ivanov or, like the guy literally wanted good. Like it's not like he wanted bad for other people, right? He kind of wanted good for other people, but to harvest his tithe from everything going on.
Yeah.
So I felt like to me it was very nuanced. I mean, to me the saddest part was the separation between Danny and his mom. That's the part that maybe killed me the most, as well as his loneliness at some points. I think those were the two worst. Um, I cried a lot when I read the book. I think those were the two worst parts for me. Was like times where he's like completely alone and like he's like there with his like ears hurting and he doesn't know why and he's like a kid and he can't even make a doctor's appointment for himself. Some of this like super loneliness where you just like wish like, you or someone could be there to be a friend to that kid. And then the part where he's like split from his mom, those are like really, really heartbreaking. Um, but I thought he gave like a very nuanced take on how like, for example, the processes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Traumatic and like, weird, like emotional battery of each other going on. But it kind of like teaches him also like some of the bases of like psychology and therapy and stuff like that, right? Like it allows him to understand people and to know how to work through things with people, even if it wasn't always well done, or if it was often badly done there, right? It was still like a basis for him being able to understand people and work on himself and other people.
It feels like he was one of those kids that have to grow up very young because they have like dysfunction in their family.
Yeah.
Like he writes about having to like take care of his mom at one point when he's still a teenager. And I feel like, yeah, sometimes like those people tend to grow up and they're very capable because they had to become that super early. And Danny, I think, is an extremely successful person. It feels like, I mean, he's accomplished quite a bit. But yeah, at the same time, it's a sad upbringing. It's a sad start. And that was one of the things actually I like was not really expecting was that like that Danny kind of had this personal connection with Hans, that he's like sees himself in Hans because when he first interacted with Hans, Hans is like the 16, 17-year-old who's getting into trouble, kind of living on his own at that point, I think. That's something I'm sure I never really considered about that part of the story is that like, oh, he very much relates to Hans in his current state.
Right. Yeah.
Now, I think Hans basically like tweeted that the book was just lies or something like that, right? What didn't he sort of like deny that? Like, didn't he sort of say like this book misrepresents
Yeah,
the
definitely.
whole thing?
I'm guessing he only read the last section. The last.
I mean, I'm sure he wasn't necessarily referring to Danny's childhood. I don't think he's pretending he knows what happens in Danny's childhood, but I think he denied what Danny said about their part of the story.
So while it wasn't the worst thing that happened to him, the detail that expressed so much of the dynamic of what was going on in that community that was like so cringe and it's also like just so revealing was when he has to give this guy the foot rubs, dude. And he's coming by the house and he's kind of living on his own with wife and he's got a family on the way and stuff, but it's still he's got to go in the back room and give this dude foot rubs, man. Oh, bro. As like a not as like like I think at that point he's like, I don't know, he's 18, 19 or something. He's got to give this dude foot rubs, and it's like, God damn, what's
No, no, he was like 15,
oh
16.
man, I mean, oh my God, it's just incredible.
And yeah, because he writes about like his dad walking in on them at one point.
Right, dude, right.
And then I guess the craziest thing was that like Stephen Camp acts as like, oh, it's no big deal. So it's like he doesn't act like, oh, I've just been caught doing something I shouldn't be doing. It's just like, oh,
Right,
hey, what's
right.
up?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was the whole thing where like everybody is on a totem pole and then you're in service to the people above you, kind of, right? Like the
There-
way they make the kids like go under the houses and stuff, and just the whole idea that you couldn't even talk back to an adult, right? Remember like
Mhm.
how it was like taboo for him to ask an adult for food?
Right.
Remember that? Yes, like wait, and like if an adult gives you food, like okay, but you can't like ask stuff of somebody
Mhm.
above you. So I think that was just like a huge part of it, right? It's like whoever's above you, like you're just in service to them.
Yeah. Which then changes once Danny becomes like a national champion. Then all
It
of a sudden
moves him
he's
up
above
that
a
totem
bunch of
pole.
adults. Yeah. It's like, oh man.
Yeah.
Then he's allowed to tell an adult that he's hungry after a chess tournament.
Yeah.
So on the positive side, I remember the first time I remember seeing Danny. I don't know the exact year, but I'm going to call it around 96 or 97. And they had put all those kids into a van and shipped them off to Albuquerque to play a tournament where I was also playing. Igor Ivanov was with them. And Igor Ivanov was like joyful, hanging out with those kids, and they were telling jokes, and they were kind of, kids that were bouncing off the walls. So there's this thing about hierarchy and stuff, but they were also just kids, and they were out on this trip. And when I was thinking about that, I was like, that's and so many of us chess players wish we had had that or something like that. A parent who cared enough to hire Igor Ivanov, who cared enough to take some epic trip, many epic trips across the country to ferry us to different places and stuff. I'm like, now as a father, I'm like, I don't want to take you to no soccer game 20 minutes away. Have no desire for that, buddy. And this guy, he got to go on all these trips. He had all of these resources that as a chess kid, you'd just be like, wow, that's amazing. And also to have not just
It,
that, but have a group of kids that you're hanging out, you're sparring with them, and you have this coach and he's drunk, but he's showing you things once in a while. This,
yeah.
in many ways, just a magical childhood for an aspiring chess player.
Yeah, I think for all the, trauma or demons that any of them may have brought to it, right? Like Ivanov had, his things that he was, dark and upset about,
Yeah.
but he must have still enjoyed those kids.
Yeah.
There must have been a part of him that just loved being their coach and like,
They,
seeing like chess kindling in the eyes of these, enthusiastic middle schoolers, right?
right.
And the kids must have loved the feeling of being on a team, right? And what kid doesn't love being on a team? It's exhilarating for anybody to be part of a team.
And David, this is just a little detail, but like Igor Ivanov, after this, moves up to Utah, where his like ex-wife is. They have this whole thing. Did he
Yeah,
end up teaching like Caden Croft or any of the Utah kids?
I'm not sure.
Because I think like there's like a legacy of Igor
Right.
Ivanov moving through the American Southwest, and he touched so many different people. He's such a mythical figure. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a chance. I would guess that he kept coaching
right. Yeah,
somewhat, right? So he probably coached somebody in Utah.
right, right. That's
Yeah.
um. The other thing I just wanted to reflect on and get you guys' take on. We're
Okay,
all
here the internet says when Caden turned 6, he spent a week training with Grandmaster Ivanov.
there we go, dude. 6 years old, man. 6 years old and vodka on the
And a
breath.
week,
Here we
huh?
go.
Week was enough.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that guy touched so many different lives. Um, one of the things that it brought home to me. We've talked a little bit about it, but the changing demographics of American chess. So, for example, back then, we just did not have very young kids in tournaments. And of the kids who were playing in the adult tournaments, they were usually like high school age. Um, and of course, like they were mostly Jewish kids who were dominating at the time. It was surprisingly few actually Asian kids. When I came and I spent summers in the Bay Area a lot, there was a couple Asian kids, but basically almost no one. I feel like Vinay Bhatt, our friend, was one of the first Asian kids to kind of break through some kind of weird demographic barrier that's turned into a flood now. But when he describes those people like Steve Stubenrauch, Spencer Lauer, the same people I played against, it's like you would go and play in these tournaments and you were playing with these kind of crunchy adults who had usually something interesting or weird going on in their life. Their lives were often off the rails, honestly. They were often like the adults who weren't functioning properly. Like John Grief in Berkeley, where David was playing, that guy was wandering the streets, homeless. And we were talking, actually, before the show, we were talking about cult adjacent communities. And, Jay Whitehead was wandering the streets of Berkeley, former U.S. champion as a Hare Krishna. So it was that kind of adult, I feel like, who was at these tournaments. And one of the things that's different about it, I feel, is those adults had all sacrificed some part of themselves to be part of chess. So like they had given a part of themselves, almost like you could think of it as a tithe to the game, a part of their soul they had to give to be part of this game. And that group of guys is mostly now gone. That does.
And also just to provide context on this change, not to become grandmasters or top professionals.
Right.
No, like even just to become a master was really hard. You had to, like, in most cases, give your life to make master because there wasn't the access to information and training tools. It was a battle to get to 2200.
Right.
And it was full of adults, and very few kids could get there because you needed more experience. There was less ability to just jump frog things while you're still young. And so to have a 10-year-old in a tournament, kids like Naroditsky and then later Caden Troff, they stood out because they were minuscule, just in size compared to everybody else in the master section.
That's right. Yeah. And now oh my God, I play in these tournaments and I'm playing kids round after round.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's got to be like the information thing. I feel like that's got to be the fact that anyone can just do Chessable like 24/7. That's why the kids are catching up so quickly.
Yeah, I agree.
John Grief, by the way, I think he was Hansa's coach for a while when he was young. So just kind of all these people.
Yeah.
Very plausible.
Put together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things we were fighting about, I guess I want to mention in this regard, is, I grew up in Santa Fe and Bruce grew up in Berkeley, and I later lived in Berkeley. And Bruce made the claim that he was not living around cult adjacent people. And we were fighting. I'm fighting with him right now about that. I think that's a bullshit call. I think that's bullshit. I mean, I'll just describe like when you live in the cult adjacent communities of that time. So one of the things that brought back to me is just, especially in the Southwest, there was so much cult adjacent stuff. People fleeing wealthier communities to find themselves in some way in my little spot in the world. And we had no idea what they were doing there, or maybe we even had resentment towards them. But they came and they had all their different things, whether it was astrology, acupuncture, or, some way of spiritual healing. And they're like coming from a place of wealth, maybe sometimes bringing that wealth to this other smaller community and doing their own thing. And a lot of the people in the chess world had participated in those kinds of communities, like Spencer Lauer and Steve Stubenrauch, right? And so you would meet those people at the tournaments too. And in Berkeley, it's maybe a key difference is it's not easy to live there financially. It's not like you can just, drop down a ladder on the economic rung and go live like in Tonto Village, where Danny is from. But when I just wanted to say, David, when I lived in Berkeley, dude, even, what was that? The Obama years, we had loads of basically, let's call it semi-commune living going on, and various commitments to different spiritualities and different ways of life that might not, I wouldn't call them cults, but definitely attempts to lead a different, more purified vision of what life should be.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if that's particular to Berkeley or a time or place so much, but I'm sure that, there are some people who, there are definitely people in Berkeley who kind of reject like a mainstream mall kind of version of
Yeah.
consumer capitalism. So those people are going to look for meaning in something other than the plastic stuff they buy. Uh, but there, I mean, there's lots of different interpretations of that.
See, Dave, maybe you don't see it because you grew up in it. So you don't, it's like the air you breathe. You don't even realize, you don't even realize the special place that you're in. You're like, oh, this is normal to me. Nothing new, nothing special is going on here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. But I mean, definitely, I don't remember people talking about unusual spiritual beliefs very much when I was growing up. People weren't talking to me about karma or, you know, spirits or reincarnation or whatever it might be.
Right.
That was not something that I was privy to, and I was, interested in adult conversations from a young age. Um, I mean, people just referred to things like the golden rule. I mean, it wasn't really weird, fancy stuff.
Right.
Well, I spent 5 years in the Bay Area, and I met so many spiritual people
Yeah,
compared
David,
to
you're out of
Southern
your mind,
California.
buddy. Me and Coach, know what we're talking about, buddy. Come
Sure,
on.
maybe you do.
Uh, I mean, it might just be like the crowd I was hanging out with, but yeah, I feel like okay, growing up in LA, you go out, some random party, a lot of people are going to be in the show business industry, they're like actors, writers, are trying to break in, and then in the Bay Area, I feel like you go out and people are into Reiki and just like weird like healing
Yeah,
practices.
yeah.
Um, okay, my best friend is the therapist, so he was in like the therapist crowd. So it's like, okay, maybe I'm more exposed to these people. But yeah, I feel like yeah, there's a lot of hippies in the Bay Area.
Okay.
Just how it feels like it's been for a while.
Yeah.
Um,
And part
Yeah,
of
I
it,
guess I
go
guess
ahead.
I don't think of hippies as being a cult. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe that's an example of I just take hippies for
no, not like
granted.
in a
But
cult, but just like people that are what's the word, like impressionable, like that could find themselves in a cult. Because that's what Danny described in the book, that there's a lot of just people wandering through like Southern California that ended up in Arizona uh,
yeah,
or NorCal. Yeah.
Like
yeah,
his mom is
man.
a remarkably sane person, right? Very practical, and then finds herself like that's one of the reasons I wanted you to address this woman's charisma because I was like, oh my God, these people really came. I mean, they gave their lives to be part of this community. Who and people who, when you read about them in the book, like they don't seem like they're totally out there. They seem like they're just normal people trying to make ends meet.
Yeah, Danny suggests that they're people in search of meaning. That's sort of one maybe linking characteristic, right? In search of some kind of meaning that they haven't found yet. Um,
The other thing I just want to add, well, about 4 years ago, I read the Donaldson book about Fisher, and a really good book. And there, he does a deep dive on Fisher's whole spiritual quest after he drops out of chess and he's hanging around Southern California. And one of the things that I think is interesting about what chess used to be is when we had those adults, we were describing them earlier, master level players who'd give some part of their lives to the game. There were so many who had some kind of alternative path that they were following. Mentioned, I mean, the big names, of course, are like Whitehead, who did the Hare Krishna thing, Grief, who had his own thing going on in Berkeley, like basically throwing away all possessions, right? And then, of course, Fisher. Those are the big names, but there was down the line of people that you would meet at tournaments in those days. I feel like there was a tinge of that going on throughout the players that you would run into, which now I don't feel is the case. I feel like we are now dealing with, let's call them normal people, if you will, and a much younger populace as well.
I feel like that might be because now it's like you can actually make a living from chess. So in the past, if you're doing chess, I think I can imagine a lot of normal people are just like, okay, I like chess, but I also need to make a living. I got to focus on earning an income, and they just don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And now it's much more plausible to keep doing chess as something that you enjoy and you make a living from. So you're not necessarily sacrificing, like Jesse talked about before. You're not necessarily giving up a piece of yourself for some implausible dream.
Right.
I don't want to make things too much about me, Jesse, but I have one thought about the disconnect between my experience and what you expect my experience to be.
Okay.
One of my parents was a scientist and the other was an artist.
Right.
And I feel like I spent a lot of time with scientists and artists. Like a large percentage of their friends were from one or the other of those areas. And so maybe there were some typical, interests or concerns that scientists and artists had in ways that they find their meanings in life, right? That might be slightly different than people who turn towards spiritual ideas, right? Scientists, I think, are maybe much less likely to be into spiritual stuff, right? They're kind of more into like just figuring everything out.
Skeptics.
Yeah. They live and breathe proofs, right? And logic and reasoning and stuff like that. To be a good scientist, you have to be very skeptical even of your own beliefs. I think that's helpful for chess players too, but
yeah. One detail actually that you mentioned, I want to bring it back to, David, about you that I think is interesting and also reflects on this earlier time in chess, which was only 20 years ago, where I remember 2005, you were talking earlier in the show, you talked about how Danny had started his own local thing going on there in Arizona, and you had done your own thing, but I just want to flesh what that was, because it's kind of interesting reflection historically on how different things are. So 2005, you had founded this club and you were running out of this kind of weird office complex in the South Bay that, you take the BART down there. And
okay, so you're talking about the second location near the Oakland airport,
right,
in kind of like a business park. I think
let's
is what
call
they
it a
call
business
it.
park.
These like neighborhoods that are just offices and offices.
Yeah,
What was the name of the club?
East Bay Chess Club.
East Bay Chess Club. Yeah. So that was, I think it's an interesting time to think about, because 2005, the bandwidth on the internet wasn't really there to do like online lessons. So you couldn't be making a lot of money yet. That was before the St. Louis Chess Club. So there was 0 prizes in winning tournaments. So, for example, I went and played in your tournament. I remember 2005. And that was the first time I met Sam Shanklin. I think he was about 12 years old at that point. And, he was a very low rated player, but he played in your tournament. And that was like a labor of love. All those players who were there, no one's playing for money. It's like you have to give a piece of your soul just to make the air flight and the time and all this stuff. And
I think people still were at that point.
Yeah. And people, and then I remember later, I wrote that article about the fight clubs. And it was a totally different scene back then because, we were playing in basements. We actually played in the basement of that church that you did. That was
right. That was the first location,
3 or something like that. And it was the basement of a church, and we're just throwing blows for just for the love of the game mostly. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
us chasing norms and stuff, but there was
Yeah.
no expectation that you're going to make any money if you make a norm or
Were
something.
you there when like the power went out
Oh
and
yeah, dude.
Yermo and Sheriff Doors were still playing, right?
Yeah. Oh, I
And
was there.
Yermo was screaming, "Benai, where's Benai?" Like, like Benai's gonna fix things. And Sheriff Dorge, of course, like in general, just if you say something like, "Hey, like the lights are out, should we like pause or like what?" Like in
Right.
general, Sheriff Dorge just wouldn't ever answer with words. He would just like hit your clock. That was his response. Like anything you would ever say to the dude would just be like hit your clock and hope you
Yeah.
flag. And then we were like standing there with a flashlight over the board while they were playing out their game. You were there for that,
Oh
Jesse,
yeah.
right?
I
That's
was
some
totally
Fight
there
Club.
for that.
That's some Fight Club. You just
Yeah.
keep punching in the dark.
Or yeah, dude, there was or where Sarkar started crying because Fed didn't give him a draw and all. Oh my God, dude, there was
Oh yeah,
his epic stories. But contrast
right.
that, say, a couple weeks, me and Kosi are going to go play Charlotte U.S. Masters. That's going to be a beautifully organized event, well lit. All kinds of people are going to be there. Conditions perfect. A little bit of money on the line. Conditions for the title players, dude.
Yeah.
Complete. That's just 20 years. It's only 20 years, and it's a complete change of what the
Yeah.
scene looks like.
It is a very dramatic change. It's hard to compare the Charlotte or St. Louis Chess Club with the East Bay Chess Club for all the love that we put into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And same presumably for Danny's programs because you're right. Like at that point, I was teaching all my lessons in person,
Right.
right?
Me
So
too.
Danny was teaching all his lessons in person. And that involved driving around the suburbs of Phoenix. So he was doing 1 to 2 hour drives, um, nonstop and like creating routes for his chess lessons he was teaching, which were kind of partly getting him by. And he is just old enough that he also came up at a time where, as Jesse would say, you had to be sacrificing for
Right.
chess. And obviously he was sacrificing more and other people were making the decisions for him about whether or not he wanted to sacrifice for chess. But yeah, he was still at that point where it was not a respectable and really good looking career prospects, right? It was
That's right. Yeah. And everybody told you shouldn't be doing it. Don't like if you said I want to be a chess player, oh, they would just laugh at you, dude. And, oh, dude, dismissed. Totally
Yeah.
dismissed. Yeah. Totally different.
Yeah, no, that was still true when I was growing up.
yeah.
Well, that was
Yeah, how-
great, you guys.
Yeah, just since we're on this theme,
Yeah.
like real quick, I'd love to hear from Costa. I know it's we've wandered through all kinds of fields of field here, but Costa, what was your feeling when you were working on this choice about whether to make chess a profession for you? Because I feel like that was like a big thing for Danny or I was it was, as Jesse says, a time where people would tell you like just don't do it, and did how was your you were just like a few years after us, like right in sort of the transition between like, don't do it, you're crazy, and like now, like, okay, maybe it's a career. I talked with Danya when he was trying to decide whether or not to become a chess professional, and it was still a tortured decision for him. What was kind of the calculation for you?
Yeah, actually, I remember I was still in school when I maybe made the decision to try to pursue chess. And it was really kind of like, I think it was really lifestyle based because I had spent a summer interning at a bank because I was in school for business. And I think I was minoring in finance or something like that. So I interned at a bank for a summer.
So this was when you were in St. Louis?
No, I was in,
No.
I went to Cal State Los Angeles
Okay, so this was still undergrad
for
business.
undergrad. Yeah.
Okay, because you also went to business school after.
And then I ended up going to business school in St. Louis a few years later. Yeah.
Okay, so this is undergrad.
Yeah. So at the time I was already very much into chess. Like I was a master and like teaching and stuff, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to, I think I was still thinking I wanted to do like a business thing, like maybe be like an investment person.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just spent this summer at a bank and I just couldn't imagine my life waking up, to get to work like 9 to 5, having to wear a suit, having to tuck my shirt in, having to like be all proper during the day, And then my only job would be to just like make a little money for rich people. I was envisioning like that's gonna be my life, versus I could play chess, like travel the world, like play tournaments. So I was just thinking like, oh, it'd be great if I could just make a living from like traveling the world and playing chess. Like I would much rather take that versus making more money being in finance or whatever.
So you were seeing
So
like there's the
mhm.
prospect of getting by. Like the lessons were basically a basis where you're like, I could get by and then I can have like a life that feels like nice to me.
Yeah. So the dream was to become a grandmaster and yeah, be able to make a living from playing tournaments and teaching. But I really like slowly stepped into it because I started with lessons, and I don't think I was thinking that I would be a full-time chess professional. But then I started writing some articles at one point, and like U.S. Chess League kicked off, so I started getting involved in that. And yeah, and then one day I decided like, yeah, I do want to just make the jump. I think I was maybe 18 or 19 when I finally decided.
Yeah, it sounds like you considered it for a while and nothing too crazy. You didn't want to give up your whole
Yeah, because I've always been like
life.
skeptical that chess could provide a living. I've always been uh pretty concerned that one day it's just gonna like like the interest will run out and just people won't be interested in lessons anymore, and then there just won't be, and you just won't be able to make a living.
Right.
Of course, since I've grown up, things have only gotten better and much, much better in the last couple of years, of course, with the new economy and stuff. Um, and now I feel like, but even now I still have this like inner fear that one day something will change, AI will take over, and then
Yeah.
people will just forget about, and then people will just forget about chess and just won't be a thing.
Yeah.
And I still think that's a possibility. Like in my mind, that's like any like kind of worldwide event like COVID that kind of changes the situation, I feel like could destroy the chess world.
Interesting.
I don't know how you,
Yeah.
but things are good for the moment. It's like we're definitely I mean, chess world is definitely thriving way more than ever. So
Okay, I have one last book related question. Jesse, you're not in a rush yet, are you?
No, go ahead.
All right. So I think I have one more interesting question about this book. How do you feel that non-chess players or very amateur, like around, barely playing chess players are going to feel about the chess world when they read Danny's book, right? Like, is this a book that's going to make people run away from chess or run towards chess or just think, oh, it's an interesting world?
I'm mostly neutral. I think they outside the chess community, they love to see chess players flagellating themselves in some kind of self-harmy way to get at their weird passion. So like I thought the pills in the Queen's Gambit were ridiculous, but that sold to a larger public. They love that idea. And if you want to just think of it, that self-harming aspect of the Queen's Gambit selling to the broader public, I think the thing about the cult and all this other stuff and the alcoholic chess teacher, you can imagine it drawing them in rather than repulsing them.
but wasn't that kind of cool? I mean, there have been, let's say, a couple world champions with like substance issues, right? In terms of
Yeah.
alcohol,
Oh, yeah.
and other stuff. So I feel like that was actually kind of cool about Queen's Gambit because most people have a picture of chess players as being very correct and proper and not these kind of like degenerate, um, addicts or junkies as some of them do turn out to
They
be.
thought we didn't get enough credit for being addicts.
Uh, yeah, I
Finally
mean,
getting our dues.
because I think there's quite, I don't want to like name names, but like, yeah, there's a few players that's like they have a reputation for playing drunk or showing up drunk or just being kind of like out of control, like substances. But despite that, they're still like brilliant, brilliant players. So it's like, that's something that I think the general public, well, probably didn't know about or appreciate about the chess world, that you can do both.
I would actually say in our comparison of now to 20 years ago or even 30 years ago, like the amount of substance abuse in the chess world it's vastly different. And you look at the top players now, they're all fit. Back in the day, they were not fit. And I don't see a lot of substance abuse going on with any of the players I'm playing with now. But back in the day, oh my God, Vojtjevic, that guy was a great player. He would be drinking all the time. All the time, man.
I mean,
Jan Helvis, dude. Oh my
during his
God,
games
dude. These
is the
guys were
key point.
drinking like crazy, you know?
The key point of what Jesse's saying is during his games. Wojciech
Right.
would literally come to the board, make a move, hit his clock, and go back to the bar, drink, come back 10, 20 minutes later, look at your move, sneer, blitz out an answer, and head back to the bar. And you had no hope. And he was completely trashed or sloshed or whatever during the game.
Dude, I
Yeah.
remember, yeah. So a guy I came up with, this is an example, was Albert Chow in Chicago, because I went to undergraduate there, and that guy was an amazing chess player in a lot of ways. He would get high all the time before the game, and I remember one time we had a big 2 hour, like a 2 hour time control game. I don't know what the time control, but there was a longer time control, and he came to the board. He was white, dude. He was high out of his mind, and he sat there and he was thinking. He was thinking. It wasn't like he was just spacing out. He sat there and thought about his first move for an hour, bro. He was thinking too. He wasn't spacing out. He was like, well, I asked him after the game. He was like, I was trying to remember all the games we played, you know. I was figuring it out. I was like, which move should I play against this guy? I was remembering all of us.
It was going deep.
It was a totally different scene, man. It was a totally different scene. You know, I can see that now.
I definitely appreciate that about Danny's book because he writes about that at one point where he's like, you know, he's like thinking about all the parents that bring their kids to chess club and they see a guy like Igor Ivanov or someone that just
Right.
doesn't have their stuff together, is like a slob, drunk, you know, and all this stuff. And it's like, yeah, not a very welcoming environment for kids. And that's definitely changed. I think now it's a lot, cleaner and stuff. But yeah, I mean that's what chess was for many years, and it still is, in certain parts of the chess world.
Yeah. I mean, I think we could see Danny's book made into a movie at some point. As Jesse says, it's got these elements that, Hollywood or like the mass media, for example, want to see, they want chess players to be different than other people. If we're just the same as everybody, it's not, they want that kind of stuff. And there's some of that stuff in there. I could see it making its way onto a screen.
And it could be like a
uh,
season 2 of Queen's Gambit could be following a story based on Danny's childhood of a kid in a cult who's really good at chess.
Well, even for me, David, like when you said you were at the Trance, I was like, I really want to see what Trina does with Dr. Durant. I need to see it. I know it's got to be compelling. Sure. So if they did that, I'm into it. I want to see Trina
well,
do it.
the next time you're in town, I could try to do an imitation of it for you, invite a few friends over, give you the feel, try to recreate it as well as I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, I mean, there might be someone out there still trancing right now.
Oh, I'm sure there is, dude.
Yeah. Get yourself an invite. Well, I think that this book and or a movie adaptation of it will probably mildly increase interest in chess. It won't scare people off, but I don't think it'll like pump them up quite like the Queen's Gambit did. There was something magical about that thing. But
sure.
I think the book would probably on average and or a movie adaptation of it would mildly increase interest. Like it'd just be another interesting story that's good enough that people want to read it and think about it, and then when you're thinking about something more, you're more likely to go play a game, right? So I think people saw the Queen's Gambit and thought, maybe I'll just go play a game.
One of the things actually you think about that as a storyline is Searching for Bobby Fischer, which of course was a great book before it was a movie. Josh Waitzkin does not become a great chess player, and honestly probably landed at a level very similar to what Danny ended up. And but the movie lets us see a winner in a Rocky style way, right? He trains and then he wins the elementary championship, and then that's kind of the climax of the movie. So that's really what they want, and that's what the Queen's Gambit has that the arc of this book doesn't necessarily have, right? It doesn't have like Danny becoming the victor kind of thing, right?
Well, I mean, in a way, he becomes a victor, right? Like business-wise, not on the chessboard, right?
Right, but people want to see it over the chessboard, right? They like that.
Yeah, like he
moment.
kind of finds himself in a new role that's like
Right.
victorious, but
Yeah.
it doesn't have the same.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it necessarily needs to. I mean,
Yeah.
And honestly, one of the coolest victories is when he decides to bring other people up as the stars and faces of the game and to become more of a businessman instead of a commentator. That was like a huge moment because I mean, he's a natural entertainer. He loved and probably still loves broadcasting, right? And being like in front of everything and talking crazy talk. And the moment where he makes that business decision, like I'm going to, kind of curate and then support and raise up all these other stars, right? I'm going to make, I'm going to find people like Hikaru and Danya and the Botezes and Anna Rudolph and Levy, and I'm going to like boost all these people, right? I'm going to put Hess in my chair and I'm going to sit back. That was like a huge moment for chess.com because it brought in, I mean, it brought about a huge amount of growth, right? To have all these extra personalities. Like I think that was just like a great business move by Danny.
yeah, I mean, definitely.
Hard to sell in a movie. It's a little subtle, but I agree.
Yeah. No, that's not like a movie moment for sure.
Right.
But that's like, a big win. That I don't think would play well in a movie.
Right.
But maybe part of the lesson with Searching for Bobby Fischer and Queen's Gambit is it just depends on how good the actors and actresses are that they get for the adaptation of Danny's book. Because Searching for Bobby Fischer just has incredible performances.
Yeah.
By all the actors and actresses, right?
Yeah.
Max Pomerank, Ben Kingsley, Joe Mantegna. Shoot, I don't know the name
Lawrence
of
Fishburne, dude. Lawrence Fishburne.
Lawrence Fishburne, but who plays the mother? She does a great job.
Oh yeah, she does do a great job. Yeah.
It's really good, right? He's a good kid, and if you or Bruce or anyone else tries to beat that out of him, I'll take him away from you.
But isn't Bruce Pandolfini like the nicest guy? Not that Ben Kingsley didn't do a great job of like Cheska, but isn't Bruce like not like just
it may or may not be true, but my point is the acting
was very good. Yeah.
Superbly done, right?
Yeah.
Like he's got his moments, right? Like you want master points? Here's like another certificate. Here's another certificate. Here's another. They mean nothing. He's like traumatizing that kid, but it's very compelling scene.
That scene was traumatizing for me as a kid to watch. Just transferring. I was just like, I still remember that scene. It hurts.
Yeah. You know, and the dad like haranguing the teacher, so embarrassing for the mom, right? Like, my son is better at this than you will ever be at anything in your miserable life, like, oh my God. And then I think the Queen's Gambit, personally, I think it was just carried by Anya Taylor-Joy. Maybe I got her name wrong, but whatever her name is, the actress in the Queen's Gambit was so good. So good. She could stare at a chessboard with no other person in the scene, right? She could do a 5 to 10 minute scene with just her and a chessboard, and non-chess players would feel compelled to watch it, right? So if they can get somebody at that level to perform Danny's book, right? Maybe a great, Uncle Steven would go a long way as well.
Yeah.
Maybe a good Igor Ivanov. Ooh, who should they cast for Igor Ivanov? That I think that actually would decide like how people get into it, just the actors.
And honestly, like a Netflix miniseries might be really the way to go, not a movie, but like a little bit of a drawn out, like 4 or 5 episode kind of thing.
Yeah. I should send Danny a text, tell him like it's important to get good actors. Probably nobody's ever thought of that before.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. The writing also has to be good. I remember people were pretty upset with the writing for Pawn Sacrifice and not so much the acting.
Okay.
But yeah, that movie didn't quite hit, I think.
Yeah, I didn't even see it. It got
Oh, dang.
bad reviews, and
Yeah, that's an example of a movie that just I mean, I remember watching it, but I was like, it didn't stick with me at all.
Yeah, it was very like Hollywoodified.
Yeah.
Like, can you imagine? Like it's not like they got like a bunch of chess stuff wrong. I'm sure they did, but it's just like, yeah, that's not what it's like. That's what I liked about Queen's Gambit, that they got a lot of like details really correct with how chess players deal with each
Mhm.
other.
yeah, exactly how chess players deal with each other. What's it like to train with somebody? What's it like to show up at a tournament? You know, what are the little ticks that your opponents have?
Right.
Yeah, texture.
Um, but yeah. Let's see. Final thoughts?
I'm out, Jesse.
That was great. Let's read more books together, and we'll do a podcast too. I like it.
Yeah,
Dojo Book
definitely
Club.
one of the best chess books with no chess in it that I've ever read, like with no diagrams and stuff, but about chess.
Right.
If you're always looking for like inspirational chess book you can read right without a board, this is definitely one.
Oh yeah, that's true. I never mentioned this book gets my highest recommendation. It's super well done, super interesting.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, whether or not you're a chess player, if you're a chess player, you want to read it. If you're not a chess player, you want to read it. The way Danny hits on all the human themes and the nuance and care that he gives to every character is really fantastic.
Okay, let's end it there. That was great.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for watching Dojo Talks or listening to Dojo Talks. If you would like us to produce one more episode of this show, hurry over to Patreon and give us $2, and we will stay on our grind.
That's right.
Nice. Are we threatening to quit?
I just threatened that you were going to quit, Kostya.
All right, bye, everybody.